Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dan, I am the IT Geek. Welcome to what is episode 4 of the Veeam and Microsoft Cloud Integration series. So before I get stuck into this episode, just want to update everyone on my upcoming schedule with regards to presentations that I'm going to be doing. So on the 25th, I will be doing a session at the WVD Tech Fest. I'll put the link in the description so you can register. My session is going to be around, it's called Lessons Learned, WVD in a Pandemic. And essentially I go through different use cases of WVD deployments I did right at the start of COVID-19 and the lessons I learned, the issues that I had and how I overcame them. So it's very much a real life sort of scenario and it's a really interesting session. So please do register and join me. There's going to be loads of amazing content that the guys who have organised the WVD Tech Fest do an amazing job. It is the first ever Windows Virtual Desktop conference, so it'd be good to be there and enjoy all the great content. My second presentation is going to be on the 27th of February, which will be the Scottish Summit. So it's my first time presenting at the Scottish Summit, which I'm really looking forward to. And that's going to be on Saturday the 27th, yeah, that's right. And there I'll be presenting around Azure Identity and Access Management. So that's going to be a bit more of a technical overview of Azure Identity Management. I'll cover Azure AD, Hybrid, and also I'll cover Azure AD Domain Services. So again, another great conference. I'll put the link in the description to that as well. And both these conferences are free as well, which is amazing, both virtual. And they're going to have speakers from all over the world. So it's like 2 international conferences. I'm very honoured to be speaking at both. And again, the organisers of the Scottish Summit have done an amazing job, like they always do, to get it on, especially in the current environment. So please do look out for those links in the description and register. And what we'll do is we'll get cracking with this week's episode. So as always, let's just start off this episode with doing a recap of episode 3. And episode 3 was all around Veeam backup for Azure virtual machines. So we start off with an overview of the product and what the product is and what it does. We then moved on to some of the features around Veeam backup for Azure VMs. So what were we able to back up? And for example, Windows and Linux VMs both are supported. And then we went into some of the requirements. So this was mainly around Azure and needing a subscription, a resource group, and a virtual network within Azure provisioned to allow you to then provision Veeam backup for Azure through the marketplace. Finished off the episode with a bit of a deep dive demo. So I provisioned and deployed the Veeam backup from the marketplace for the Azure VMs. We then connected to that through the web portal, if you remember. We did a backup, we added all the configuration to it. We added we configured an account. I then backed up a test VM that I had. We let that we did a snapshot of it rather than like a full backup. I then did a restore of that snapshot, which all completed successfully. So let's move on to this week's episode. So episode 4, which is backup and recovery for Azure files using Veeam. And what we're going to do is, again, we always start off with an overview. So this episode is no different. So we'll do an overview of Veeam backup for Azure files first. We'll then go into some of the use cases where this can be utilized. It's not just as simple as backing up Azure files. We are gonna do that in the demo. However, there are a couple of different use cases where it can be utilized, so I'll discuss those. And again, you all know how I love my diagrams. I'll then actually display and just discuss the solution components for both the type of different use cases that we have. Finally, I'll again go into a demo. Again, we really enjoy demos, so I want to do one for this episode as well, where I will essentially back up an Azure file share that I've already got pre-provisioned. Now, this is all been set up in advance, so I've got Veeam installed on a VM in Azure, and I've already provisioned my Azure files. So in the demo, I will just give a bit of background as to some of the steps you need to do to configure those, because it's not just as simple as configuring Azure file share. You need to make sure it's got specific settings and that you have a storage account with certain requirements around that. So I'll go into all that during the demo. So let's move on to the overview. So an overview of this particular service. So Veeam Backup and Replication version 10A provides a support for NFS 4.1 on Azure files. So again, it's the latest version of Veeam Backup and Replication that you need for this support. So make sure be wary of that. So Veeam Backup and Replication, it uses the Azure storage account credentials to access Azure file shares to retrieve the contents. So it's using Veeam's enhanced NAS backup technology. So it's just something to keep in mind as well, that you're actually using your Azure storage account credentials rather than any Windows credentials or any other sort of account. And also, finally, the recommended implementation for this is to leverage the Azure private endpoint for the offsite backup stored in another region. So that's one of the sort of prerequisites that I set up in my demo, which I will obviously show you when we get to that point. So again, just something to keep in mind, that it's recommended that you do configure an Azure private endpoint when you're going to utilize Azure files backup for Veeam. So I just want to go through some of the use cases where Azure files for Veeam backup can be used. So the first is a simple one, simply backing up data that's stored on Azure files. So that's the support for NFS 4.1 on Azure files. That's the one we're going to be demoing as well later on in this video. Another use case is where you want to store offsite backups for Azure NFS 4.1 file shares in a different region, or you might be using a different type of media like Azure Blob or something like that. So that's a second sort of scenario where you could use Azure NFS 4.1 file shares with Veeam. The final one is you want to migrate from on-premises environments to Azure, or for like a hybrid cloud solution with protected workloads in Azure and on-premises. So again, it's good for hybrid workloads as well, and it has a use for that. So moving on from the use cases, I wanted to just touch on some of the solution components. So the first one is within Azure. So this is where you are within your cloud infrastructure. As you can see, we've got our Veeam infrastructure in two different regions. So we've got region 1 and region 2. And on the left hand side in region 1, we have our short-term retentions here. So this is where we've got the Azure files, the NFS 4.1. We have our VNet, and we have our Veeam backup and replication server. What we've got then is we've got a VNet peer-to-peer relationship with the second region. So that could be, if you're in the UK, it could be UK. If you're in UK West, in Azure region 1, you could go to UK South, or you could even go into Europe or US or anywhere. But essentially, you've got that peer-to-peer relationship between the VNets. So that allows traffic to traverse over even to the other region. And here you've got your other private public endpoint connection. With regards to the actual resources, here we have our offsite repos. So again, that could be another NFS share, or it could be actual blob storage, or VM shared VM with a repository on it. And these are for more kind of long-term retentions. So this is the sort of solution components within Azure that I wanted to show. So moving on to the second sort of solution is more of a distributed solution components. So here we have obviously your on-premises at the top here, where we have our Veeam backup and replication console, and we have some repositories either side. So we have, it could be any type of repositories there and shares on various servers. Then what we have is we have a connection into two separate Azure regions. So that's via a VPN or an express route. So if we look on the left hand side, we've got the Veeam infrastructure within the Azure region 1. What we have here, we have our VNet, which I will touch on in a second. But then below that, again, we have our separate repositories. So these could be object storage, or again, I've marked it as short-term retention. So these are more than likely not going to be object storage, because object storage we're using for more long-term. but these could be any sort of backup repositories within Azure. And then we have some file proxy servers here with a cache. And finally, we have our Azure NFS share here, which again is within the short-term retention, and we're using that to either back up to that, or we can use it as a repository as well. And as I said, we have our VNet here, and what we have is we have a VNet to VNet peering private gateway with region 2. Again, that's our private connection there, going across the regions, because they're two separate VNets. And here we have our area for more long-term retention. So again, offsite repositories, which again, because it's long-term retention, could be more object storage, which in this case will be Azure Blob Storage. And we've got some proxies as well on this side of the diagram as well in region 2 to help with that sort of traffic. So those are the two sort of solution components I wanted to touch on. So if we move ahead now, we're just going to get straight into the demo. So those of you that follow me on social media, on my Twitter, you'll have seen that I had some trouble with this demo. I'm going to do a blog article all around the trouble that I had and the fix in the end. And again, I'm probably going to touch on it in the video as well. But the issue was with, it was a setting within Azure on my storage account rather than anything to do with Veeam. So hopefully I'll be able to show you that in this demo. So within the demo, what I'm going to do is provision the storage account, provision the NFS share within Azure, and then just go through the process of adding it to my Veeam console, again, that I've got installed on my VM within Azure. So here we are in my Azure console. So just to give you, just a bit of an overview of what I've got at the moment. I've got a virtual machine that's stopped and deallocated, so we'll quickly turn that one on. And this is my Veeam server that has Veeam backup replication installed on it. Let's get that started. I also have my VNet, which is obviously my VM sits within my VNet. And then what I need is I need a storage account to provision the Azure NFS Share to. So if I click on storage accounts, I've already got a couple of storage accounts here, which you can see in true Blue Peter fashion. These are ones I created earlier, but I'll go through the process that I followed when I created this. So if you just click on add, we'll just add a new storage account. Just going to add it into that resource group. We'll give it a name, so IT Geek SA03, because we've already got 02 and 03, or 1 and 02, sorry. So hopefully that ticks. So here on the performance, just leave it on standard for a second. If I drop it down, you can see I've got 3 options. The option that we actually need is not here, which is the file option. So if I click on premium though, this is where it allows me to see the file storage. So you do need to make sure you select the performance premium tier when you want to do an NFS share for your Azure files. So let's click on file storage there, and I just left the replication. Again, depending on your type of replication, feel free to change that, but for this I left it like that. Now at the moment I'm going to leave this as default, but we are going to change these network settings. You do have the option. I'm going to go through that, but just again for the demo purposes I'm going to leave it as just public endpoint. I do not recommend that if it's in a production environment. You need to put like a private endpoint in there and lock down the networks, but we are just going to leave it. Again, I'm just going to go and just leave everything else on demo for now. There's a few settings I will show once it's provisioned. Hopefully we'll review it past that. So let's create that. That's going to take a few minutes to provision, at which point I'll come back and we'll go through to the next steps. That didn't actually take too long, which is really good. So let's go to the actual storage account. So this is a newly provisioned storage account. And again, we can go and create the NFS share, but there's just a few settings I want to go into first. So if we go to networking, here we have the option of, if we start off with the private endpoint connections first. It's best practice to set up a private endpoint for your for connections, just to make it more secure. So what I'm going to do is click on that to add a new private endpoint. It's going to stay in this resource group, and we'll just call it anything. Wish I could type test endpoint. I can't even spell the word end. Wow. So leave it at that. And again, region, we're going to leave it in UK South as well. So if we go to resource, this is where the sort of main information is. So resource type, you're going to want to select Microsoft storage here. So we've got all the way down to storage accounts, which are there. So Microsoft storage/storage accounts. And then the resource, so this is essentially the storage account that you want to link it to. So because we're doing it to storage account 3, we select that. And you have a target sub-resource, which is, you've only got the file option here anyway, so you leave it on file. So if we go through to configuration, so this is the which network you want to deploy it in. And again, for the purpose of this demo, we've only got one network, and that's where our resources are going to be. So we're going to leave that as default. And down here, you get to configure your private DNS integration. So again, I'm going to leave it on the sort of default configuration because this is best practice. I'm not going to, again, for the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to put any tags in it, and we'll create it. So once that's created, I will pop back in and we'll move on to the next step. That was another quick few minute deployment, which is great. So let's go to the resource again. Just to show you the endpoints now created. It's approved, which is great. So we're going to go back into the storage account now. So go to SA03. And here we are going to go down to, or we could just click on file shares here, we can go file shares here. So here we want to provision our NFS share essentially within our storage account. So let's go to file share. So here we'll just give it a name. So test NFS. Click test NFS. And again, capacity, you can select what you want. I'm just going to leave it on a terabyte or 1024 gigabytes. And this is the important part here. We want to select NFS preview. And here we have the root squash. So this is essentially permissions for NFS file shares are enforced by the client OS rather than Azure File Service. Toggling the root squash behavior reduces the rights of the root user for NFS shares. So if you look at the kind of the Microsoft documentation, they kind of tell you to select root squash. So we're going to do that as well, and then we create it here. So at this point, you know, our NFS share is configured, and this is where I started to come into problems when I was doing this for the first time. Now, at this point, I thought, right, I can go into Veeam and I should be able to add my URL or my link. So I went into, you go into here to connect from Linux, and essentially this is the it's that bit there that you need. That's essentially your NFS share that you need for Veeam, right there. So I was copy and pasting that in there. I was going into my Veeam server, which I'll connect to shortly. And I was going through the process, and it just wouldn't connect. It just couldn't find it. I couldn't mount it. If I did if I did like a DNS checkup on it, it could see it, and it was there. It had the IP address, but for whatever reason, I couldn't do it. My network was all open, so it was accessible publicly. You know, there was nothing else that I thought was missing. So racking my brain for 3 or 4 days, as people who follow me on social media will have seen. And it turns out the issue was related to something here. So secure transfer. So this is an option that enhances the security of your storage account by only allowing requests to storage accounts by secure connection. Now, from what I read when I was reading up on this and trying to fix it, that when this is enabled, it essentially does some sort of double encryption. And that's what was blocking Veeam from accessing the NFS share, or even for me I couldn't mount it either. So I had to disable that, then save it, and that was then allowing it to. From that, it started working, which was a relief. So in this instance, again, I've got a standalone Veeam server rather than a networked, it's on the domain. And I believe from a Veeam perspective as well, having a standalone backup server is also best practice and best security wise. So, you know, my Active Directory domain join remains disabled for my Azure files. If I go down to my network again, sorry, we've got our private endpoint, but with the firewalls and the virtual networks, Again, I would recommend, if you're doing this in production, to select networks and make sure you lock down which networks you're gonna add it to. If you've got any public IP addresses like your on premises, maybe you could add those in there, or even your VPN gateway, and you need a VPN if you want to link it to on premises resources. In my case, again, just for the demo, I've left it open. So what I'll do is now I'll get logged onto my Veeam server, and then we will add the URL into Veeam. So here we have the Veeam backup and replication console. And what I want to do is I want to add in the file share, so my NFS share. So click on file shares, let's make sure we're on inventory, file shares, and want to add the file share. And we've got a few different options here where obviously we want to do an NFS share in this case. So here's where we put in the NFS path, and it's got to be in this format, so use server : / folder format. So I'll go back to my share that I created, and I will the address that I showed you earlier, which I will paste in now. That's what we need to mount it. So I should have really had this copied and pasted, but I didn't. So bear with me 2 ticks. I'll get this across, and I can show you exactly what the format is. Here we go. Copy. And then paste. So here you can see I've got my server in this case is itgeeksa03, which is my storage account, .file.core.windows.net, which is the sort of DNS for my Azure share and my storage account. And then after that, I've got my storage account name and then the NFS share itself. So that's the sort of format that it requires for the NFS path, and you can, as I said, you can get that from the NFS share itself. When you look at the Linux path, it gives you this. Click on next here, and we're just going to leave this default. If you want specific file proxies, you can add those in, but I'm just going to leave it as default for now. Click on apply, and then this does the whole validating process. And after a few seconds, it then moves on to the next screen. So we'll wait for this to think for a few seconds, and then once it's moved forward, I'll come back. So that took about 30 seconds to a minute while it was just processing. And to be fair, it's on the same network. This VM's on the same VNet as a storage account, so I'm not sure why it took so long. But here we are. We're back. It's kind of it's done the process. It's created the database records for the server. I want to click next for the summary, and then click finish. And hopefully there we go. So there we can see our NFS share, and from here, once it's in here, we can actually create backup jobs. So we can right click it, we can add it to a backup job. So in this case, it's a new job. I'm just going to, for argument's sake, I'm just going to leave it on defaults for now so I can go through it, and we can use that as a source. And this is our kind of backup repository target, which is just a local one. Again, it's all the same sort of settings you'd see in a normal backup job. Even if you're backing up on premises or whatever, you can do a secondary target if you want, a secondary repository, schedule, all that jazz. I've got nothing in there at the moment, so no point in backing it up. But that's essentially what I wanted to demo, being creating an NFS share in Azure Files, and then obviously creating it within the Veeam backup job as well. So that concludes this episode, which was episode 4. So just a quick summary of what we went through. We had a bit of an overview of Veeam backup for Azure Files and some of the features within there. I then explained some of the different use cases. So I think there was an Azure only use case, and there's like a hybrid use case. I then showed the actual solution component. So there was the 2 kind of diagrams that I went through, and all those components put together. And finally, I did a demo where we created a storage account, we added the Azure NFS share, and from there we added that into Veeam and created a backup job. So that's it for this week. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I just want to thank everybody for their ongoing support. Thank you for all the positive feedback I've been getting around my videos. So I've got a couple more episodes within the Veeam series, which one's going to be around replication and BCP, which should be a really interesting one. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm doing a few sessions in various conferences coming up, both the Scottish Summit and before that I'll be doing the WVD Tech Fest. So I'll put those links so you can register in the descriptions. So, please do register. There's going to be some great content. So again, thank you everyone for watching. Please do like my video and please do subscribe. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.